things. From last meeting, there was a request to have MDE provide some insight on MDEs and the Climate Commission's expectations in terms of Empower. I reached out to Chris Hoagland, and I believe he's on the call, and MDE seemed receptive to the idea. So really the question is, when do we want to have it? What's the most appropriate time? And hopefully that'll work with MDE's schedule. Any thoughts on the best time in terms of how the schedule sits, topic-wise, when we should have that presentation? And my thought would be we'd have it before comments are supposed to be submitted, so that any input from MDE could be incorporated into those comments. Not at once, everyone. All right, well, we can circle back to that.
Your Honor,
yeah,
this is Dylan Voorhees from VEIC, working with the OPC. Everyone, good morning. I think I was one of the people that was urging we take this step, so I appreciate that. The only thing I would say was I think being able to base comments on that presentation would absolutely be helpful, and so as soon as reasonably possible, I think would be useful. I don't see any reason to sort of put it off, so we would look forward to hearing that presentation.
Is there do you have a thought as to where, just topic wise, as to how the schedule is currently, or again, it will be amended based on the utility suggestion, but like kind of what?
I'm not totally sure.
Okay.
I mean, I think where this becomes, I think it's potentially relevant to some of the conversations we've already been having about scope of goals, for example. It certainly becomes relevant as we think about greenhouse gas goal more specifically, and I'm not quite sure when or even if we sort of are getting into, well, we think the goal should be this many megatons of greenhouse gases or that many. But certainly in terms of the scope of greenhouse gas emissions,
maybe
I think that's relevant.
You think it might fit in the, we had a topic that was included expanding Empower and energy equity. That's what I was thinking. Maybe it would fit in there.
Is that an expanding, is that a comma or a semicolon?
It's the way I have it on the modified timeline was it's a comma. I mean, if it makes a difference, we can make it a semicolon. I'm not a grammarian, and I struggle with when. And I don't, to the extent it makes a difference, I can put whatever it is you'd like it to be.
I think it's adjacent, potentially adjacent to equity issues, but I think it's more related to sort of potentially expanding Empower more than to equity, but sure.
Okay. All right. Very good. All right. That sounds like a good idea then. All right. I will circle back with MDE to see when we can have that presentation. And Dylan reminded me, just for anyone who's speaking, if you could just let everyone know where you're calling from and who you're representing. That'd be beneficial to folks on the phone. Cindy, you had your hand up.
Hi, good morning. This is Cindy Hosordo with MDE. I have a clarifying question. So you reached out to Chris Hoagland, who is the Climate Change Program Manager and has a lot of expertise with the GGRA program. So you reached out to the perfect person, and I know he's on the call. I'm wondering if you can clarify for the call for the team here, what you think would be helpful to see from MDE or the commission. I know we already released a report last year, and then I believe we're going to have a presentation from Jim Gravatt as to what the potential structure could be moving forward.
Sure. I'll kind of defer to Dylan because I know he was one of the proponents, but I think it was what MDE's and the Climate Commission's expectations were for the Empower work group moving forward. Dylan, you still there, sir?
Yes, I've looked at that report. I think Cindy, if you're referring to the buildings subgroup, I can't remember what it's
Yes.
titled. Yep, and that was a useful document. I don't know if that's actually been shared with this work group listserv. That probably would be useful. I think what I guess I was thinking about is hearing a little bit more about the modeling that may have been done or be ongoing. I think you have E3 maybe as a consultant doing some modeling, and I was interested, and I think it's quite relevant. What are the framework and the assumptions that are going into the climate action plan that have bearing on the goals, and particularly the scope to some degree, and also the order of magnitude of emission reductions that
yes, that is a very important question. I do see that process as being a little bit separate, and that question is so large that it almost reminds me of the behind the meter / front of the meter question. I believe we had briefly mentioned talking about inventory of what is already going on, but that's the level of complexity here. But I'll defer to Chris here because he's more knowledgeable on that front.
Thanks, Cindy. Yeah, we'd be happy to come and present, sort of what the Climate Change Commission recommended last year, which is very high level, and is so far very consistent with what this group has been discussing. And then also how we sort of, on the MDE side in the 2030 greenhouse gas plan, translated that into more specific information in the modeling. And also an update on how that sort of analytical piece is progressing within the buildings ad hoc group this year. So yeah, we'd be happy to put together that sort of covering those three general topics, right? Very high level, what the commission identified as some priorities, slightly more detailed, but still tentative, what we analyzed for the greenhouse gas plan, and then 3, how that's been fleshed out a bit this year so far in the buildings ad hoc group.
So
I'm happy to provide that at the group's convenience.
I think that sounds very very helpful to me. I think I can't remember if this came up sort of previously as a question, and not to sort of pose this question now, but to illustrate, did that modeling assume sort of status quo level of effort from Empower? Did it assume a ramp up? Did it assume sort of those understanding what those assumptions were would be useful, so that one hand of government can be hopefully consistent with the other.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
All right, consistency in government. You're asking a lot. All right. Thank you, Chris and Cindy. And they did share a couple documents in the chat. So if you're interested, please review those. All right. I think before we move on to Mr. Gravatt, Lori, did you have something you wanted to address?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is like not something really for discussion. It's just a clarification from our last meeting. There was a lot of conversation about things happening on the utility side of the meter, and should those be normal utility programs? So I just wanted to clarify that there was a group of programs that we were talking about, and those programs that we presented were like the community-based programs. I think we mentioned things like community solar, maybe unmetered lighting, and we also talked about some demand response opportunities. And for those programs, we didn't see those necessarily as exclusively utility owned and operated programs. Some of them are like a vehicle to grid is not on our side of the meter, right? The customer's car is on the other side of the meter, and that it would be a rebate opportunity or an incentive opportunity similar to our other demand response programs. And some of the other ones might be opportunities for third parties to get involved and have some sort of incentive or rebate to the developer to then be able to offer something at a more reasonable price to the customers out there. So I just wanted to clarify that while some of the things we're talking about, particularly, things on our system, we wouldn't necessarily put out to a third party or consider a non-utility program, that some of these might be non-utility. So I just wanted to make sure that just because something is on the other side of the meter does not exclusively mean that it is a utility program. So clarification with really no further need for discussion that I see.
Okay. All right. Thank you, ma'am. And with that, unless anyone has anything else preliminary, my thought would be we'd kick it over to Mr. Gravatt for so he could walk us through what he provided to the group earlier, and then we could go back to the utilities. They had a couple issues that I had requested that they address, and then we'll see where we go from there. All right. Mr. Gravatt, the floor is yours, and thank you very much for putting that together. I appreciate it, and I realize this is high level. It's not etched in stone by any form or fashion on your point, but I appreciate it as a starting point, sir.
It's my pleasure, sir. Thank you. Good morning, Judge McQueen, Judge Burke, everyone else. I hope you can hear me okay. Yeah, I hope there wasn't too much rolling of eyes and gnashing of teeth over this draft. I tried to put in enough places that this isn't a proposal, the numbers are made up. We're not saying that, that necessarily 45% of the utility savings should come from energy efficiency. And I just tried to put in some numbers because I was afraid if I didn't, it would be abstract enough that it would be hard to understand. So with that, and I want to say again that the concept, at least as I'm thinking of it, is trying to be responsive both to the need to address, certain policy priorities of the state, and the reality that for a utility who's implementing programs and trying to reach a goal, you do need a certain amount of flexibility. You need some room to move because it's very hard to rely on everything in the world being exactly as you plan for it to be. We know that. And recognize it and agree that it's really important. At the same time, if we look at, for example, the current Empower portfolio, there's a goal, and how the utilities achieve that goal is based on the plans that they present and that are approved by the commission, and they have some flexibility. You can shift some budget amounts, but there are boundaries on how much you can shift. It's not unlimited. It's not like here's the goal, go out, do whatever you want to do to get there. And I think while it's not always explicit in the guidance from the commission, I think with a number of years of program implementation, the utilities have a pretty good understanding of what they think the commission is looking for in terms of balance between different sectors of their customer base and so forth. So the idea is, let's put, I've said boundaries. You could think of them as guidance or maybe guardrails on the level of effort that the utilities would put into certain areas of the portfolio, but not prescribe a specific number to each of those policy priorities. In my view, if each of those had a specific number, and I used the made up number 1,000 units, if you have to achieve 1,000 units of something and 400 of them have to come from this, and 400 of them have to come from that, and 200 of them have to come from something else. That's 3 different goals. It's not, there's no flexibility really in that. So I'm trying to not do it that way. I'm trying to provide a little more flexibility. Let's see, I'm not done with all the caveats yet. I also want to say 2 other things. One is that, there may well be other boundary constraints, priorities that would be included in such a structure. I think that's open for discussion. These are some representative boundaries. And lastly, they might change over time. So I think, if there's a framework that creates certain boundaries, I don't think we would assume that they're going to stay the same for a decade. And in particular, I'm thinking about the relative prioritization of beneficial electrification versus electrical energy efficiency, because the opportunity for efficiency may change. Everybody's been saying for years that it is changing. I'll agree with that. But the opportunity for beneficial electrification, in all likelihood, is going to increase because technology is going to improve, and the urgency of the need is going to also improve. So with that, and I'm just going to say, jump in if you have questions, but I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share this one. And I'm going to hope that it will show up at some point.
We got it, sir.
It's amazing, even with the terrible bandwidth that I have in rural Vermont, you can see that. So these are just some placeholder constraints. I think it's pretty straightforward. Here I said 45% of the overarching target from electric efficiency, no less than 20% from fuel switching fossil equipment to highly efficient electric end uses. I'm not saying anything about how these numbers are calculated or any of that. It's an illustration. No more than 5% through natural gas efficiency. And as everybody knows, our position would be not equipment rebates, but again, that's open for discussion. I didn't plug that in here. 5% from, no more than 5% from innovative solutions along the lines of what the utilities talked about last week. And 40% of the combined totals from 1 through 4 goes to equity, disadvantaged communities and households. And this was my attempt to get to the annual incremental question. I guess I'll say incremental annual savings question. If we have a life cycle savings goal, is it another goal to have an annual goal? In this case, it's a boundary. And again, for simplicity, I said if it's 1,000 units of life cycle and it's a 10-year average measure life, then you would expect that 100 units of incremental annual savings would get you that 1,000 units of life cycle savings. So I said as a boundary, let's say you have to get at least 75 in each year. And I think the reason for that is to not, backload all of the savings to the 3rd or the 5th year of the plan or whatever. But I think OPC could talk about the reason for that incremental annual savings boundary more if they want to. So what does it look like if we try to put this together? And I came up with 4 different illustrations, all with made up numbers. So the first column is based on 1,000 units and 45%, 20%, and so forth. What does that lead to a target? You'd say 450 units would come from electric grid efficiency and 200 from beneficial electrification, at least. No more than 50 from natural gas and innovative, 400 from equity, and you have to get at least 75 annual incremental in the year. And more made up numbers in this year, this utility end up reporting 645 units of electric grid efficiency, which would be 61.5% of the portfolio savings. And that's more than 45%, so that works. For beneficial electrification, 322 would be almost 31% of portfolio. That's more than 20%, so that works, it complies. And going down the line, for natural gas, 47 is 4.5%, innovative is 35 is 3.3%, so it's complying with these conditions. And same for equity and so forth. And so it's overall compliant. Now, I think there's another discussion potentially about, I know there's another discussion about performance incentives, how you allocate them to different parts of a target and so forth. We're not going there right now. This is just the framework. In another illustration, we get 48.2% of electric and 44.9% of fuel switching, so those work. And the natural gas and innovative are below their boundaries, so that works. But the equity, the 350 doesn't achieve the 400, so it doesn't succeed. And they didn't get enough annual incremental in that year, so it failed on that one. But it did get the overall CO2e number. So again, how that, yes, please.
I'm sorry, you got a question, Cindy?
Hi, good afternoon, Mr. Gravatt. I really am appreciative of your proposal today. But for number 5, I wonder if we could at some point talk more about that. I'm not sure if, the equity portion of things merits a different discussion, or if now is the right time. But long term, if we dedicate 40% of the funds to go to, is it just limited income households? What does that look like in practice, and how does that support like the energy grid as a whole? / could that potentially also be used for workforce programs potentially?
Well, I think all of that is on the table, and I don't mean to, with this, the reason I put 40% in here without defining what's included and what's not is it's consistent with what's happening in New York State and some things that are happening at the White House with targeting 40% of benefits from clean energy programs to equity, let's just say equity. But here, this is just a made-up number for illustration. 40% is something that the efficiency advocates think is a good place to start talking about it. But what's included, that's, you bet there's some more discussion there. Thanks, Cindy.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, so let's, oh yeah, go ahead.
This is Pearl at
Pearl.
Pepco and for DPL. Hi, Jim. Just as a quick clarification, because I think I heard 2 different things. Cindy, I think that you stated that as 40% of budget going toward an equity program, just using the hypothetical numbers. But I think, Jim, what you have laid out is different, which is benefits. And that, I think that's an important distinction for us to keep track of. LMI communities specifically can be more expensive on a cost to achieve basis for energy efficiency and other metrics. So I just want to make sure that we're not using percent of spend to be the same as percent of benefits, because I don't think that that works out. And Jim, I don't think that's controversial, but please correct me if I'm wrong.
I completely agree with you, and you're correct. And sorry, I didn't pick that up. We definitely, in this example, have put 40% of benefits. I think that's what we put in our the MEEA proposal. And this isn't intended to represent the MEEA proposal. It's an illustration of the framework, and I know there's a lot of negotiation that has to happen about what the numbers are. But I figured since I get to do the illustration, I might as well put, our proposal in. But yes, totally agree. And we've seen in many places that the costs for low-income programs tend to be far higher than for other programs, and thus there is a disconnect between share of benefits and share of costs. Anything else before I look at number 3 and number 4?
Hi, this is Philip Sheehan from the Office of People's Counsel. Jim, this is great. I really appreciate it. I'm a little bit confused though. When we talk about benefits, are we talking about carbon dioxide equivalent savings, or are we talking about megawatt hour savings, or are those two things interchangeable?
So, hi Philip, and great question, of course, and I think also not defined, subject to discussion. I think, we could also look at benefits on a sort of a total benefits picture. and we look at all the non-energy benefits from across the portfolio and allocate it that way. All of that is up for discussion in my book. For the illustration, I used a straight percent of units of CO2e, undefined what a unit is in this illustration. Okay,
Nice.
So in this one, illustrative scenario 3,
Mr.
the requirement.
You got another question. I'm sorry.
Oh, good.
Mr. Miller.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Your Honor. Mr. Gravatt, I just had a question here. The leftmost, I'll call it column, that identifies the different, I'll call it, not sure what to call it, but types of metrics. How do you? I guess I'm trying to digest this. So this is a example for potentially a utility, and these percentages would vary from entity to entity just based on different dynamics or any. And maybe you were going to get there. I was just trying to understand how this, whether this was just meant as a simple one example for one utility, or if this was more viewed as a statewide approach, or how you envision those categories applying on a statewide basis, or even, down to the utility basis.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Miller, for the question. And I just conceived of this as an illustration. So as with the other questions, really important questions that need to be resolved, but I didn't attempt to address them here. And, I think just my opinion on whether they should be the same for all the utilities or not, it depends, I think, on how aggressive the targets are. If they're fairly modest, then I don't think it necessarily requires that level of specificity. But if they're as aggressive as we hope they would be, then it might. And I would look to the utilities probably to make that case, and look forward to that discussion. Does that make sense? I'm going to assume that it does. Okay. So number 3, just going down this column on the right, electric grid, 34%. They're supposed to get 45%, so they didn't comply there. They did well more than 20% on the fuel switching. They did more than sort of allowed for natural gas, but they were under the boundary for the innovative programs. They hit the equity metric, they hit the annual incremental, and they fell short on the overall savings. So what the consequences of these, hitting or not hitting these metrics is another discussion, but just kind of trying to illustrate how it would work. And looking at number 4, I think, we can compare scenario 4 to scenario 1, because they both comply with all of the boundaries. In this case, electric grid is just over 45%, and so is beneficial electrification. The others are below their 5%, 42% for equity, and exceeds the total target, exceeds the annual incremental. But the difference here, so illustration 4 and 1 are both meet all the metrics, but here it's an even split between grid efficiency, electric grid efficiency, and fuel switching. And I'm going to scroll back up to 1, and we see it's 60-30 electric grid efficiency to fuel switching. Both of them would meet all of the criteria, but they're very different programs and portfolio approaches. And to me, that's the sort of flexibility that I think the utilities should have. And I don't know if this is the right amount. Maybe it should be a tighter boundary or not. That's, again, all up for discussion. But really what I was aiming for is something that creates some boundaries on the important policy priorities for the state. So utility couldn't say, for example, with no boundaries, and I'm not in the slightest suggesting that anyone would do this, But let's say you did, a big CHP plant somehow, and it was going to last for 50 years, so you get all of your life cycle savings from one program. That probably wouldn't be entirely consistent, or maybe it would be with the state policy priorities, but I'm guessing that there are other things that the state views as important. We just want to put some boundaries on that, but provide flexibility. And I think that's all I've got to say, and I'm look forward to discussing this. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you very much, sir. I know I appreciate the explanation and you putting that together. All right. Who's got some thoughts on Mr. Brad's presentation? Lori?
Bet you're surprised to hear from me.
Not at all.
Not at all. Look at it conceptually, then look at it at this level, which is a little less than conceptual. Conceptually, there may be ways that you can design this to work to and up to or no more than. But, and I'm speaking for BGE, we've not had the time to look at this at a joint utility, so I want to make that clear too, that I don't think that this, I think there's the potential for unintended consequences from this, that it doesn't, even if the percents change, first of all, this is pretty much, I think Mr. Gravatt said, the kinds of percentages he would like to see. But even if those percentages are different, I just think it's pretty complicated to agree or not agree to this now. And if we don't do it right, however we set up these things, it could lead to unintended consequences. And first off, stating the obvious, the utilities have not yet agreed to life cycle as our megawatt savings, but that's an issue that's not directly related to this. But some of these others, like no less than 20%, and whatever that number is, should be left to fuel switching. And then if I couple that with savings through gas efficiency, again, I know there's a lot that can be done. I know that some utilities have more opportunity for fuel switching than others, let alone, opportunities for propane or oil. But at this moment, gas is still a fuel that is allowed in most, if not all, at this point, of Maryland. And going back to, we want our customers to have the most efficient use of equipment that they possibly can, and to limit us, and whether the 5% is 10% or 2%, to have some sort of limit on savings from natural gas measures. It could be limiting. What you could be doing is people are out there now buying dirtier furnaces, and rather than switching to an electric furnace, or a dirtier water heater rather than switching to an electric water heater. The world is not perfect, and just because there's not a rebate doesn't mean they're going to go to electric. It may mean that they go to a less expensive version of what they might have otherwise bought. So I just think we need to be careful. And that's why parameters sort of make me nervous, is that there might be unintended consequences of having something dirtier out there than we might have otherwise had. Similarly, no more than 5% coming from innovative solutions. That might sound like a great idea in year one, but technology change. So again, I find these limiting in terms of, we don't know what technology changes, very rapidly. I mean, things that you didn't even imagine 3 years ago are happening now, and totally unrelated to energy efficiency. But now I can wear a mask, look at my Apple Watch, and look at my phone, and my Apple Watch says, yes, I recognize you, right? So things change so quickly as they're needed. You don't want to say, limit this to 5%, and whether we have a 3-year cycle or longer, it may be more relevant if the cycle's longer, but I don't think we want to be in a situation that there's some really great new technologies in year 3 or 4 that we're limited to not taking, or having to give up something else that's working because of a parameter there. And the one that really concerns me a fair amount is having a really large limited income goal. In a perfect world, we could serve them, and we could serve them cost effectively, and we can do all these things for them. But there's a lot of people on this call that are ourselves included, that want to make sure that the surcharge is managed. Everybody knows that it's expensive. Our limited income is harder to reach, and often a more expensive, higher incentives may be needed to help the affordability. And it's unclear if this thing includes or doesn't include DHCD, but if we have to layer on top of what DHCD is doing, it's just going to be a huge impact on our surcharge. And also with a 40% number, assuming, and I know that these are hypotheticals, that's greater than the population. And I realize that there may be more energy savings per account, but that's greater than the population of limited income customers in Baltimore. And it's possible that we have the largest, I don't know what all the other service territories have. So you're either increasing a surcharge or taking away programs from your moderate income customers, your middle income customers, and even your affluent customers. And I'm not sure that that's the intended consequence. So again, the concern here is that all of these, we're always trying to balance what we're doing, but the concern is that if it's not designed right, you're gonna cause, whether you cause people to buy dirtier equipment, whether you serve your limited income and everybody else and increase the surcharge, there's just, it's just concerning. And maybe when you put pen to paper, it washes out somewhere, but it just looks a little bit concerning. And again, the comment I made at the beginning, this is BGE. I'm not speaking on behalf of the other utilities.
Thanks, Lori. I'm going to clarify that I view this as not a specific utility goal, but as a sort of a policy goal. So DHCD would be included. It's always been my view that DHCD is implementing utility programs. I know that it's not a contractual relationship. I know that it's a little murky that way, but they're paid for with electric ratepayer funds. They're electric efficiency programs. So.
Okay, I appreciate that clarification. It makes it more affordable. And again, until you put pen to paper, I'm concerned that this kind of view could have unintended, whatever they might be. Those were a few that I thought of, but I'm concerned that it might have unintended consequences on what we can offer, who we can offer it to, and for gas customers potentially not getting the most efficient equipment on our service territories, or in our air, more importantly.
Yeah, and I don't disagree as to your point that it could have unintended consequences, but I think that that's true for any structure that we come up with. We will not be able to come up with a structure that is completely absent from the potential for unintended consequences. So my hope was that by creating boundaries, we could limit that to some degree. And I don't. I think this probably isn't the place to discuss whether the 40% is the right number or not. It's really about the framework. Thanks for the comments.
Sure. We'll go to Steve in just a second. Hey, Lori, quick follow-up. Is it fair to say that BGE would not be a fan of these, I guess, the boundary type concept?
I can't say that exclusively, that there may be a boundary concept that, and I agree with Mr. Gravatt that it's probably, any goal could have an unintended consequence. So I'm not looking for complete elimination of unintended consequences. That possibly a different look or a different structure with boundaries would be reasonable. The ones here, there were enough that were concerning to me, and it doesn't matter as much whether the number is 5% or 10%, but just the specific items on here just seem to be potentially limiting in terms of new technology, a potential limiting in terms of reaching gas customers, and potentially expensive depending on how the limited income is run. But it could be set up in a different way, or different parameters within some other items. So I don't want to give an exclusive thumbs up or thumbs down, just concern about the specifics that are here.
Understood. All right, we got a few hands up. We'll go to Steve, then Cindy, then Pearl.
Can I just respond quickly?
Oh, yeah, sure.
One thing about the limiting in terms of new technology. I'm not sure I agree with that. I mean, because most new technology is going to fall into either the electric grid efficiency or the fuel switching beneficial electrification bucket, or even the gas bucket. And innovative might not have been the right word. I meant it to illustrate, to make room for this. We're not sure which side of the meter it's on. We don't know what it's even going to be. It could be something we haven't thought of yet. And I think that's different than new technology. But if there's something that falls into that category that's driven by new technology, in a 3-year plan cycle, I think that leaves room for that to grow and then become part of a plan or a proposal or, you know, a request that we need to change the structure because this thing came along that we didn't see coming.
And that makes sense, at least to me, as far in terms of revisiting the parameters based on new innovations. So, all right, Steve, you're up.
Good morning. Thanks, Your Honor. And thanks for this, Jim. I just wanted to touch on a few points, you know, around high efficiency natural gas equipment and just really, you know, send the message that, you know, that there really are 3 options when customers are facing this. It's not, you know, if you take away the high efficiency gas incentive, they're gonna, a customer or business is going to, you know, immediately electrify. I think that there's some upfront cost and sort of other elements for that, and you know, could potentially lead to more baseline natural gas equipment being in the system. So I just really want to bring that point into the discussion. I also want to, you know, sort of bring up the surcharge element. If there were sort of these prescriptive boundaries, would that put the utilities in a position where we collect a surcharge from customers, but then not provide a benefit to, you know, based on that, whether it doesn't fall in these buckets or guide rails? And I think that could also create some issues with, you know, looking at end users and how, you know, the surcharge is used, trying to make these parameters and, you know, denying some projects that will lead to you know, savings, both GHG and energy. So really wanted to, you know, sort of bring those up and sort of look at, you know, providing the most opportunity for savings for customers and what works best for businesses and customers, and, you know, and having the opportunity for, you know, savings for these end uses. So really just wanted to, you know, add those points to the discussion.
Hey, Steve, who are you with, sir?
Oh, apologies. I'm with Washington Gas. So
okay, I figured you were with some gas company. So all right, thank you, sir.
Yeah, you bet.
Cindy?
I had a question for Lori. I'm trying to understand, when I saw James's proposal, I saw a lot of opportunity. So I was surprised to hear the comment about unintended consequences regarding technologies. I was wondering, Lori, if you could, and perhaps you can't at this point, but if you could expand on which technologies you're thinking about specifically.
Well, if I knew what they were, they wouldn't be new and cutting edge. What I'm concerned about is no more than 5% of the savings be achieved from innovative solutions. And again, maybe because they don't fit within 1, 2, and 3, but what concerns me, so maybe there's a little more latitude there, but what concerns me is that no matter what side of the meter it's on or whatever, what concerns me is that what happens if some new whiz-bang thing that just, you know, is incredible and it can do great things for the environment, but then it puts us at more than 5% because it's so efficient and so effective and so clean, and I don't know what that is. It's something new that I didn't know existed. To implement that, now I get 10% of my savings from an innovative solution. I've overdone that, and that may put me in a position to under % boundary on something else. So, you know, it just concerns me that some of these, especially when it comes to new technologies, because it changes so quickly, that it concerns me to have some sort of limit on it.
I'm not sure what the history is for funding innovative programs that don't have any established, you know, programmatic or cost levels. But I'm not sure if that would be funded under Empower. I'm not sure how that works. But my hope would be that there would be proceedings and there would be discussion before anything like that would ever happen.
We wouldn't implement a new program without, so we present our programs, and then before the 3-year cycle, and then during the cycle, basically they're fixed. We do have some opportunity for pilots, and we have a fairly small pilot budget, and that would allow us to test some new technologies, and that's generally how it works. and it could limit, and even the current process could limit, but as you're getting broader beyond just megawatt hours or decatherms, that there's more opportunities for technology and therefore more opportunities to take advantage of technology. But no, the utilities do not, under any circumstance, I don't want to say under any circumstances, but we just don't go out there and implement something and say, hey, by the way, this is what we've done. I mean, there's parameters on what we're allowed to do and how we're allowed to do it.
And to be clear, what I was thinking of under this innovative bucket, it's not things that the utilities have done under Empower in the past, because Empower has been more narrow. It's only been efficiency.
Right.
Yeah. And Lori, one thing that occurred to me as you were talking is, if these were statutory requirements that could not be changed, that's one condition. If the utility could freely petition the commission and say, we understand these boundaries, we think it's in the interest of our ratepayers to implement a 3-year program that has these boundaries, which is somewhat different, and then the commission could act on that. Would that change your view?
It would be helpful. Again, there's a lot of moving parts in here, so I'm not going to say, yes, now let's do this. But certainly for some of these, it's more concerning for me than others. But on something like new technology, if we were to say, I know the boundary is 5%, but we really, this new technology came up and we would like to do something that would up it. Individually, I think it's helpful. Again, collectively, I'd have to look at what all of this means. Again, as Mr. Burr said, and as I said, that you could be in a situation when you go back to the gas things that you might be not encouraging the most efficient equipment on the system and stuff like that. So again, you'd have to look at the whole thing collectively, but on innovation or on anything that's an up to or no more than, if we agree on the parameters, I think that's helpful. I'm not going to commit to anything right now, but I think that's helpful.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Lori. We got Pearl, Dylan, then Ed Miller, and Andrew Lawson. You're muted, Pearl.
Mute.
Pearl, you're muted.
I said something very profound, which
I'm sure you threaded the needle right there now.
I know it. Mostly what I was just saying was, I'm not going to try and make anyone go after my last name of Donahue Villette. So Pearl is always appropriate and happily accepted here. Just some people are using last names. So Jim, I just want to say thanks for putting this forward. I know that this has been it actually has been a really tough needle to thread. One of the things we talked about last week that I wanted to get your take on here was when we talked about boundaries, how tight those boundaries are, because the way that I view this really changes based on how tight those boundaries are. It's either you've now, instead of having a single goal, you've given me 6 opportunities potentially to fail here instead of just 1, or you've given me some guideposts that are very, very achievable hurdles that are sort of that minimum bound. So the way that I think about this really does in some ways depend on those numbers and whether you've given me 6 goals now instead of just a single goal or 2 or 3 goals. So I wanted to get your take on the boundaries. And I had one other question, but I wanted to ask that one first.
Thank you very much for your question. I was going to say Ms., but it's Doctor, isn't it? Dr. Donahue Villette?
It is, if you so choose to use it. I would, again, not make anybody do that.
Yes. I think, from without being invested in any of the specific targets, because I've worn both hats. I've implemented programs and had to respond to performance indicators that were potentially competing. So I think the right structure is a boundary that's not a walk in the park. Does not give total flexibility, because if it gives you total flexibility, then what's the point of even having it? Why don't we just have a single number and you can do whatever you want to do to get there? But they should not be so restrictive that you can't manage the implementation of the portfolio to achieve it. That's not a specific number, but that's, and I know you don't want to lose sleep. You've already lost sleep with your kids, but so let's just say you have to work late a couple nights to, to achieve it. I think if the goals are easy, then we're not going to, do what the state is asking for. But the reality is you need to have flexibility to achieve them.
I appreciate that, Jim, and I appreciate the emphasis on flexibility. What I hear, though, is a little bit of this is 6 goals, and you're going to need to hit all 6 goals rather than it being, we've got this meta goal, and here are some minimum conditions that you have to hit in order to meet that main goal. I just want to make sure that I'm getting that framing right.
I'm not viewing it as 6 specific goals. I mean, with the examples here with the 45 and the 20 that leaves 25% of the portfolio, a full quarter of the portfolio that you would have the flexibility to move, to achieve however you can. I admit that the no more than 5% boundaries constrain that a bit, but I think there's a lot of flexibility with that. Again, hypothetical numbers, but I chose those numbers to illustrate that I don't want this to, to say, okay, well, yeah, you have flexibility with 2% of the portfolio. What are you complaining about? It needs to be more broad than that. It needs to give you more room.
I appreciate that, and I'm sure we'll have, as we get to numbers, we'll have many spirited conversations on what exactly those numbers are and what's flexibility, and we'll have some different views. But I appreciate that. The second question that I had was on the megawatt hour, like the megawatt hour savings goals, and I'm going to put aside if it's annual or life cycle right now, just to talk conceptually about it. I want to make sure that I understand what you're meaning to fall potentially into that bucket. I saw on the megawatt capacity savings goal that it was sort of a much more open field in terms of distributed energy resources, energy efficiency. It seemed like that was a bigger bucket, and that your view on the life cycle megawatt hours, again, life cycle or annual, I'm going to put that aside for a second, was sort of more narrow, tailored specifically to what I might call traditional energy efficiency programs. And I wanted to make sure if I understood that correctly.
I think that's what it shows. It's not something that's just carried over from really the first draft of the MEEA position, and I didn't really think through it that carefully. So open for discussion.
Yeah, personally, and again, this is not speaking for the joint utilities. We haven't developed a full position on this across the utilities. I would hope that megawatt hour goal is open to more types of measures, and that we've got sort of, so we don't have too many fragments of you can use this technology for this and you can use that technology for that. I think we've talked about it before. Simplicity is golden. We're all about it. So if I have a single set where I'm looking at for eligibility, or if I can just sort of keep that universe open, that's going to be helpful for me.
Can I ask how you would view the current Empower framework in terms of the requirements for megawatt hour savings and what's allowed and what's not allowed?
So I am not the expert on the current framing, and where I'm coming to this really from is the existing Empower program is obviously a very successful program, and I don't want to dilute that in any way, but I am looking at the change in orientation to a greenhouse gas goal, and might very reasonably be some differences in what makes sense when you're targeting greenhouse gases.
Thanks.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Dylan, you're up.
Thank you. Again, Dylan Voorhees with VEIC, working with the OPC. I will also thank you, Jim, for this this presentation, and it really does help crystallize a couple of things and is engendering some good conversation. A couple of comments that have come up. One, a little bit just more about the complexity of this or the number of goals. I really think that the utilities can handle frameworks like this, and I would point out, as we may have put in our initial filing, over in New Jersey, not that I would ever just recommend we do whatever New Jersey does, but many of the utilities that operate in Maryland have or at least some have sister utilities in Maryland. They recently adopted 7 gas saving goals and 7 electric saving goals. They're pretty traditional, but they're very much the same universe. They're not quite as elegant as what Jim has put forward. They're net benefits and annual savings and life cycle savings and low income savings and demand reduction. Vermont, not that I would also recommend this, Vermont has more than 20 if you consider both goals and sort of minimum standards that have to be achieved. And that's a little bit analogous to what Jim has put forward. So I'm not proposing that we have 7 or 20, but I really think it is taking us in an unhelpful direction to sort of say, we can't handle, program administrators can't handle this. They handle it in other places. We can handle it here. Let's focus on what are the right goals to get our policies achieved. Second comment quickly, don't have a lot to say about the gas issues that are brought up. We've certainly heard this many places, and this is a tricky question. How do we avoid excessive investment in inefficient gas technology while recognizing that there are some clear reasons to focus on lower greenhouse gas technologies? I would just point out that it's been challenging for VEIC and OPC to get to a fuel neutral structure of incentives. We theoretically have agreed on that, and we continue to sort of have to push and question whether we've achieved even a baseline of sort of not putting a thumb on the scale for gas efficiency. And so that's important, and that's been hard. The third comment, my last comment, is about this innovation framework. And although I don't think OPC sort of has a position on this piece of it, it definitely makes sense to put some limit on things that have greater risk. That's a natural boundary to set. And yes, it limits things, but it limits things for a purpose, which is these are activities for which there is more uncertainty or there's more risk. Right now, many of you, of course, know, but for everybody, right now, the PID bucket allows for investigating things which have not yet shown to be cost effective, or we don't know how they will perform. We think they will perform well. We don't have the data. We don't have the evidence to say that they're cost effective enough to sort of be in the portfolio. That is a risk. Those investments may not pan out, and it does make sense to put limits on those. I don't know, and this is maybe a question for you, Jim, about sort of, and you spoke about this a little bit, how to define what is in this bucket. And I do think innovation is not the right term, because what I'm hearing is this is a bucket that is things that don't save energy or reduce demand, because anything that saves energy or reduces demand, whether it's innovative or been around for 10 years, that fits in the first big bucket. And so I don't see this as limiting any innovative technology that you can demonstrate saves energy or saves demand. If you can't demonstrate it saves energy or reduces demand, then it has some risk, and then sort of some test pool that has some limits makes sense. Am I interpreting this right? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Voorhees. To be honest, I included that because the utilities were saying we want to be able to do things that we don't know what they are yet, but that could really be the right thing for the climate, for the greenhouse gas goals, that could be implemented by a utility or a utility in partnership with other organizations. And we don't want a structure that says, don't do these things that make sense for the state goals. So, that's why I put it there, was to acknowledge that to Ms. Duan's point about perverse consequences, to not create a goal structure that would prevent or disincentivize utilities from doing the right thing. But I don't have a specific definition of it. I think that's, I agree with you that anything that clearly is going to fall into electric efficiency or even capacity savings or beneficial electrification, that's going to be most of what is going to come up in the category of new innovation that we don't know what it is yet. And I think your point about risk is well taken. That's a good reason to put a limit on that. But I will say the other reason that I suggested, and again, made up number, but only 5%, to put a boundary on it, is that exactly to prevent the sort of the perverse consequences that could come up. If something comes up that utilities feel comfortable including as in this innovative solutions bucket, that would mean they would do less electric efficiency and less beneficial electrification, then I think that would be not what we would want them to do necessarily. Again, speaking in such vague terms, it's really hard to make any statements like that, but I think there are a number of reasons to limit that.
All right, thank you, sir. Mr. Miller.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Just wanted to follow up a few points from Lori and that Pearl made earlier, as well as respond to a couple comments from Mr. Voorhees.
Mr. Miller, you're at WGL, correct?
Actually, Potomac Edison.
Okay, my apologies.
You're no worries. The one thing that I want to come back to is that, the one thing that the utilities have communicated is that we want the state to be successful in meeting the climate action plan goals. And, following up some comments that Lori and Pearl made, Lori was acknowledging that, there could be unintended consequences. And, that is also a sensitivity that I picked up on as well. And the comments from Pearl on understanding the boundaries and how they're set. It's one thing if there are guide rails on the side of the road versus, being, very narrow. And, so, the sensitivity that I'm raising is that, effectively what I'm hearing is when I hear that we have to have more than something as a boundary, that's effectively a goal. If we hear, or if I hear no more than, which I believe was with some of the metrics, that's a restriction. So that really touches on what Lori was saying in terms of limitations. And the situation there is if we're implementing our plans and we're up against a limit in a given area, but we're running short of meeting our goal, which means our contributions to the state meeting its goals are going to be behind. That really is a restriction that ties our hands. And Mr. Gravad, I appreciate your opening comments regarding flexibility and how flexibility is important. I know that's been a theme that we've advocated in prior meetings as well, is that if we want the state to be successful to meet its climate action plan's goals, we really need to be thinking about providing more flexibility, not restricting flexibility or limiting flexibility. And, to Mr. Voorhees, I believe, who commented that, and maybe I'm wrong, but there was a comment earlier around, well, we can always file with the commission if we need to change something, if we need to do more of something or be outside of a boundary. The problem with that is that takes time. So again, that ties our hands and limits our ability to meet goals, especially in the shorter term, but puts us behind longer term. But secondly, that's not administratively efficient. That costs all of us time and all of us money and ultimately our customers money. So again, just sensitive that when I see 6 things that have more than or no more than, effectively they feel like goals to me or they feel like restrictions to me, which is counter to our primary principles, which is we need more flexibility to help the state to meet its goals. And all of those are, in my mind, undermining our ability to meet the goals. The comment regarding New Jersey, I do want to touch on that as well. Let's not kid ourselves. New Jersey's 6 or 7 metrics that are put out there are different than what we're talking about here in terms of goals. The way New Jersey works is the utilities develop their plans to meet an energy savings goal, period. What's being referred to are called quantitative performance indicators, which are based on the utilities filings. So we develop our plan to meet an energy savings goal in New Jersey. There are undermining, as a result of our portfolio plans and our programs, we produce our metrics in terms of how much benefits the portfolio is going to create, how much lifetime savings versus annual savings or the portfolio creates. Those are quantitative performance indicators then that are part of our filings that we will report on and we will be measured against. So we're effectively creating those underlying metrics as part of our portfolio plans. It's really no different than how Maryland operates today. Our portfolio plan filings provides a lot of the same, if not all of the same information that we have highlighted is already part of our reporting process that everyone has transparency to in terms of seeing how is our program performing in relation to what our original plan was. So I just wanted to call out that distinction and not mislead anyone that New Jersey has 7 specific goals or I forget the number that was quantified. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Your Honor, could I just make a comment?
Please do.
I appreciate everything the utilities are saying, and I just want to acknowledge that there's going to be a tension here, because as the implementers, the utilities, are sort of bound to argue for what they think is going to be most achievable and most, expeditious to implement. And as advocates, some of the rest of us are bound to push on those boundaries pretty hard. But I am a little concerned that I sort of hear, if I took what the utilities are saying, I think there's 2 different ways to hear it. One is we don't want any restrictions, or the other is we want very specific goals rather than a structure that gives us some flexibility within it. I'm not quite sure how to interpret that. We could just say, let's have a greenhouse gas reduction goal and set it at a pretty high level and give you a lot of flexibility within it. It seems like that's preferable, or maybe not. I'm just wondering about it. But I guess the other thing I want to say is, on the point about some limitations, it's not in the absence of context. It's in the context of the greenhouse gas goals that the state has set, which are ambitious. So really trying to figure out how can we create a structure that will lead to the most accomplishment towards those goals.
I think this all falls under the premise of no good deed goes unpunished, Mr. Gravatt. So we'll come back to it. Dan Hurley.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. This is Dan Hurley with the Commission staff. Overall, generally speaking, staff does kind of likes the concept that Mr. Gravatt did present. Again, working within the parameters of up tos and no more thans, that's obviously open for discussion. But I think we are in line with an overall carbon reduction goal, and then we just got to figure out how to get there through the various programs and technologies and methods. And I think Mr. Gravatt did try to take into account multiple parties' positions as far as the flexibility and what's been in the program in the past and what might go in the program in the future. I think one concern I have is with fuel switching. It's never really been a part of Empower before, and how those costs could flow through surcharges and things like that. And then I guess also, given the current fuel mix of the PGM market, is it better for the environment to burn gas efficiently at the home, or are we going to burn gas at a power plant and then ship the electricity to heat homes or use that electrification as a replacement for gas? So I mean, there is, I guess, some concerns with if there is that, where that balance of the generation mix and PGM comes into play, as far as when it becomes more beneficial to go for that kind of fuel switching. So that's kind of a concern there. But I think with the overall, I think with the structures and the topics, I think we can probably work towards some kind of consensus on how we could reach this overarching carbon goal with the trying to give some flexibility within some of those some of the 5 areas that was presented.
Thank you.
That was it? No, I thought you were going to have more of a response there.
No, I appreciate Mr. Hurley. I completely agree with you. The generation mix is a really critical component of how this shakes out, and it's not something that I've yet thought about. But I very much, and there's Mr. Hoagland, who I was going to defer to. Maybe we'll hear more about that in his presentation when that comes. But I appreciate the support for the framework, Mr. Hurley.
Chris, you want to jump on?
Yeah, sure. And just some on the generation mix and how that affects emissions from different heating sources. That is a part of the analysis we do and that we're doing for the Buildings Ad Hoc Group. And it looks like right now, in sort of the year, not right now, but the year 2020 or so, a heat pump using what our generation mix was last year would have been, compared to a gas furnace, would have had about 15 to 20% lower GHGs over the course of a year. But 10 years from now, it will have dramatically lower GHGs. So within the lifetime of equipment installed today, that picture will change quite a bit, as we're expecting relatively rapid decarbonization of the electricity sector. So that's a challenge there, that when we're talking about a GHG goal and potential electrification, is that it's such a moving target. And do we assume, do we use the electricity system we know, which is the one we have right now, or do we make assumptions about what the electricity system is going to be within the lifetime of this equipment when we're trying to estimate the GHG implications of different equipment choices? And we do analysis on that when and all of our modeling data is public, and so we're happy to provide that and show how you could estimate the GHG intensity of delivered electricity in the future. But that does embed some policy assumptions, right? You are making assumptions about electricity policy changing in the future and electricity markets changing in the future.
Thank you, sir. All right. Anybody else? Is this something that the utilities may want to take back and chew on it a little bit and submit something in writing, or?
Judge McLean, when you're looking for something or suggesting something in writing, are you thinking sort of a la formal comments, or can you help me understand where you're looking to go with this?
Just something with circulated within the work group. Nothing like officially filed with the commission. If does that answer your question, ma'am?
I think so. I think that's part of it. Part of the question. And I don't know that I can speak for all the utilities, but given just when it came through and given the amount of conversation, I do think it would be helpful for us to memorialize some of the joint utility comments on it. And I think hopefully, Jim, that will also help clarify we're not just looking for that one major goal. We did put out in our initial proposal that we had, I believe, 4 goals put forward. I think we all talked about 3 to 5 as being about the right range. So we can certainly write that down, and look forward to more conversation on it.
Yeah, I think based on the discussion that it seems, and I realize you haven't had a ton of time to digest this, ma'am. So, and I know there's some concerns, and maybe some of those have been alleviated by some of the discussion. Mr. Gravatt?
I was just going to say that thank you, that I appreciate and look forward to seeing your written comments. And to be fair, yeah, that was probably a little bit of my frustration sneaking out there about because I really did view this as trying to come up with more of a compromise. This is not our position necessarily, so I was hoping for a little bit more, a little bit less pushback on the compromise position. So, sorry about that.
Oh, please don't. There's no need to apologize, sir. That's how I interpreted your attempt here. And again, it's somebody had to do it, so I'm glad you took the plunge. In terms of, I know I'm already looking forward to next week. Would the utilities be able to circulate something, assuming we have a meeting next week, assuming people are available? Is that something that utilities or whoever wants to respond, I should say, could be provided by like Tuesday, or is that too soon?
Judge McLean, if we could have until Wednesday, I think that would be helpful. And I know that puts us in that same tight timeline. I'm just thinking that if at the end of the day today, we tried to schedule a call for the joint utilities, just speaking about the joint utilities, if we have Friday to put together a position, Monday to meet about it and see where we're aligned and misaligned, and Tuesday to try and write it, you're probably going to get something that looks like a text that I would write. And I would prefer to have something that's a little bit more polished and put together.
Understood. If I said Wednesday at noon, would that help? I'd like to have it so folks could at least have a few hours in advance of another meeting.
It seems reasonable to me. I don't know what the constraints are on my other colleagues at the utilities though. So if there's someone from another utility that has something that's a major conflict, I mean, please speak now.
All right. Dr. McNeil.
Good morning, Judge McLean. Kitson McNeil, Maryland Energy Administration. Just a couple of clarifying questions for Mr. Gravatt. So in terms of the distribution of the reduction in the proposal, now the 5% for natural gas, does that mean that you're proposing that there wouldn't be a separate gas goal, or is all encompassing of all the goals would be this one goal? So it would include both gas, and so 5%, no more than 5% would be from natural gas. So as opposed to the proposal that was submitted by, I guess, us and some of the other stakeholders to have separate goals.
In this framework, Dr. McNeil, you're correct. That would be just part of the overall greenhouse gas reduction goal. Again, not so much my proposal as trying to be responsive to some of the comments from the various parties.
Okay, and I don't know if you've had a chance to dig into this a little bit, but in terms of the 45% from, I guess, traditional, if I might call it that, traditional energy efficiency, do you have any idea what that translates to in terms of actual reduction, like megawatt hour? Okay, just curious. Okay, and in terms of the 40% towards, I guess, limited income and disadvantaged groups, does that, I know you're referencing what's going on at the national level and looking at, I guess, what's going on in some other states, but is that, I guess, what flexibility is there to look more closely at what's actually going on in Maryland to come up with a number that may be more reflective of Maryland? Because I'm not sure where Maryland falls on the spectrum there, but if we're going to go with, I'm guessing the 40% is a national average, or I guess could you just shed a little bit of light on that number at the, I guess I'm not familiar with how they came up with it at the federal level either. So.
And frankly, thank you for that question. I'm not familiar with how they came up with the number either. We put it in as a placeholder because we're aware of those discussions, and I think that the right number for Maryland would, of course, have to involve some analysis of not just what's been happening in Maryland, but what the opportunity is. I think, you know, we've talked about this a little bit before. I think equity is a tricky thing, because do we say equity is making sure that customers get the same opportunity? Do we acknowledge, you know, some of the historic conditions that have led to such profound inequity now and try to, at least in some way, start to address that? I think those are all open for discussion, but I suspect that historic inequity is part of what's driving what seems like a pretty high number on the national level.
Okay, and I guess this is probably for later on in the discussion regarding the limited income goal, but do you foresee, or are you considering all sources of benefits towards specific groups at the state level? So the different, I mean, I guess ratepayers also pay into some other funds that also assist with bill payments and arrearages. Are you specifically looking at Empower?
I don't have a specific position on that. I think what you include, you know, I'm open for discussion personally, and I think the advocates in general, we're open for discussion on that. But what's included then affects where you set the bar.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for putting this together as well. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right. Anybody else? All right. So why don't we, before I forget, why don't we, and I'll send out a modified timeline again, that we'll try and meet again next Thursday. And anyone who wants to respond to Mr. Gravat's proposal to do so and circulate those comments no later than Wednesday the 9th at noon. So we can all have an opportunity to digest that and hopefully put this issue and this first topic to bed. All right. Moving on. Oh, yes. Dylan and then Cindy.
Thank you, Your Honor. So a quick procedural question. I may not have pulled up the right version of the schedule, but is there also an overall comment deadline, for lack of a better word, for next Thursday, sort of on new goal structure? And maybe you're planning to come back to that, but I have on my calendar that there's sort of opportunity to comment on these last couple of work groups.
It is.
Okay.
So yeah, I included kind of like a concluding comment opportunity for each section as we move through it. But given that we're going to be meeting again next week, I would push that a week.
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful.
Sure. Cindy?
I think I'm just stating the obvious here, but one piece of the puzzle here is electrification of vehicles. And I just had the question, could that, speaking of benefits that go to equity considerations or low income or, you know, potentially middle income, sorry, I'm adding wood to the fire here, but in my mind, the EV question is also part of what we're talking about, but that might not be something we solve, you know, today. I'm just mentioning that.
Sure. No, it's a fair question. My thought would be the EV would probably be discussed outside the goal structure, possibly in the expanding Empower section, where we're going to talk about low-income programs, goals, measurements, protocols, expanding Empower and energy equity. That'd be my thought. All right.
That makes sense to me. Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Chuck, it's Dan. Just on that, there is an EV work group that's kind of working through some of these issues. I'm not involved in that work group all that closely, so I don't have a lot of information on it, but we do have there is a separate EV work group that's run by Amanda Bess, who's one of the commission advisors.
Okay. I could, I'm sure she'd love it if I drug her into this one. All right. Well, I guess we can touch base on that once we get to that topic. All right. Anybody else? And I do appreciate everyone in advance, everyone's flexibility. All right, moving on. There were a couple things that I had asked the utilities to look at. They were going to look at some of the risks of longer term projects and as to who and what would bear that risk. Then some additional information on what the first year versus annual reporting on savings could look like. And then finally, utilities were going to report back on their positions on whether cost effectiveness should be portfolio or sub-portfolio based, or it should be based on the program level. Anyone want to jump in?
Yeah, Judge, this is Jeff with Smecco. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right, thanks. I was going to speak on behalf of the utilities regarding call it the 3 or 5 year plan and long-term risk. But before we get started on that, if you do have questions about the EV side of things, I am taking part of that. So feel free to ask away relative to where that working group is. They're still working through benefit cost analysis, pulling a lot from Empower over to the EV side of things, but it's definitely not apples to apples going across those types of programs. So they're working through all those issues, and Amanda is definitely the right person to work us through that. So with that said, looking at those 3 to 5 year plan kind of cycles and how projects fall, there's not much more to add than what we said last time, that if projects do span, those project or the time frame within a 3 year cycle, it is difficult to help manage that risk. If we had longer planning cycles, it would definitely help. And Mr. Hurley was right when he brought it up last time. There's nothing to stop a project from coming in year 4 or year 5 if we went to those longer time frames and spanning program cycles. So there's nothing we could do about that, but seek guidance from the commission like we've done in the past to span program life cycles. So I guess in the spirit of compromise and some of the stuff we've seen put forward, maybe we could ask for 4 year planning cycles, maybe not 5. We hear most people like 3, so maybe we could request even 4. Just wanted to put that out there and answer any questions if people have them.
Thank you, sir. Any questions on that? Or any appetite for a 4 year cycle? Dr. McNeil?
All right, Kitson McNeil again, Maryland Energy Administration. Just a quick follow-up, a general follow-up to the comments that were made last week from the utilities regarding administrative efficiency, if I remember correctly. In terms of adding an additional year based on the compromise proposed or suggested here, how much savings are we looking at? Is it just on admin costs potentially? I don't know if you have the number, if you looked at it, but I guess where exactly would those administrative savings potentially come from? If you could just shed some light on that or provide a little bit of detail, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Dr. McNeil, for that question. The efficiencies come in when you start looking at developing those plans. As you well know, you've been around long enough to know what it takes from the utilities and even the stakeholders' perspective to go through all the efforts of all the working groups, all the inputs, and we start basically a year in earnest ahead of when the filing is due, going through all the different iterations of things. So from a utilities perspective, we could lengthen that a bit, so there's savings there. It does take each utility, and I'm sure it takes different amounts of money to develop the filings, and each utility pretty much knows what it takes to put together a filing, just strictly monetarily. They're expensive. Not quite a rate case, but definitely expensive to go through all those efforts. And again, if we shave a year or add a year to that, and then you have to take a look at all the hearings and all the filing of comments that everybody goes through. I don't think anyone ever has done the math on a statewide perspective, but that's got to produce $1 million in savings.
Okay, I mean, I appreciate that. Thank you. If possible, and I know we all have a lot of deadlines and timelines to meet, but if numbers could be produced, in the near future, just to give us an idea of what that could be, that would be great. At least we would appreciate it. And I guess the only other question I would have in terms of evaluation and I guess changing the protocols for that, is there any concern that might add some additional costs, or is that also going to produce additional savings as well? Yes, I can direct that to Mr. Hurley as well, or Mr. Loper if they're on, but feel free to give me your take. I'd appreciate that as well.
Yeah, I'll kind of answer from the utilities perspective that I don't think there would be any efficiencies there, because each program is evaluated on a year-by-year basis. Not each program, but we select a set of programs to be evaluated each year. So probably not too much savings from an evaluation perspective, but I'll let Dan or Joe answer as well.
Sure. This is Dan Hurley, Commission staff. I agree with Jeff as far as the commission side of the evaluation process with Joe. It's an annual contract. We have a 3-year contract, and we're going to be bidding for a new contract for the next program cycle. But if it's a 4-year cycle, we'd probably just go for 4 years, a 4-year contract with an annual cost for each of those years. So I don't think there's any savings from a 3-year, 4-year, or 5-year based on the contract that we did with our independent evaluator.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hurley. So I guess Judge McLean, just to I guess summarize, our position is still 3 years as of right now, but if there's any evidence or numbers that could be put forth that could support extending that, I mean, we're at this point, we're open to looking at that and seeing if we can help reduce some of the costs to ratepayers. So thank you.
And,
Okay.
and just to note there, the law does require a plan every 3 years, so we'd have to get some legislative changes to make that effective as well.
All right, thank you.
You can do that though pretty easily, right, Dan?
I don't think that should be too hard, especially if it becomes a consensus from all the parties of the work group, which is to figure out who would want to make the bill sponsorship or whatever.
Well, assuming we do come up with something other than a 3-year cycle, we do have a few years to work with in terms of trying to get legislation changed to the extent that's even feasible. But is there any appetite for a 4-year goal from anyone other than the utilities? And I know MEA said they'd consider it if there were some savings.
From staff's perspective, I'm kind of on the same on board with Kitson with MEA. I think if we can see some savings, and it's if we see some real savings, then it's something we would be willing to consider.
Okay, thank you, Dan.
And I guess one other comment, I think it would be depending on how our goal is arranged. I don't know if we're going to keep it on a cycle goal or if we go to a longer term goal, but I think it'd be useful if we have a longer term goal, that if we're going to have, let's say it's a by 2030 goal, it might be helpful to have our program. If we have multiple program cycles within there, it'd probably be helpful to have it. One of the cycles end concurrently with the end date of a long-term goal. We kind of had this issue where the original Empower goal was for 2015, but then the program cycles of 3 years, the program cycle was 2015 to 2017. So we had the goal requirements in law in 2015. Then we had kind of 2 years of programs where we had a little bit of uncertainty about what we were going to do because we didn't have a goal. But that just depends on if we're going for a longer term goal or if we're just going to keep a goal within a program cycle. So something to think about there.
Okay. All right. Scott,
Judge McLean, this is
hold on, Phil. Hold on a second. Scott's got his hand up.
Okay.
Thank you, Judge McLean. So Scott Falvey, DHCD. Just a couple comments. So DHCD is not opposed to a 4-year term. Actually, for programs for projects that run long term, a 4-year term is actually better because it provides a little more stability to the funding and to the applicants. Granted, for DHCD, only a third, maybe approaching near a half of our budget is for long-term projects. But I know the utilities also have long-term projects. So we certainly would not be opposed to a 4-year term. Regarding savings relative to the term, I don't have numbers on our end, but the conversation came up about valuation. And so I just wanted to touch on, I think it was last week's conversations where including savings from other resources, I guess, towards Empower, and that the savings would have to be evaluated. If I understand what was being said correctly, if Empower has to evaluate the savings from other funding sources, that's actually going to increase the cost of evaluation. Right now for the Empower funded programs, we're at a 4% cap for evaluating the Empower programs. If we're going to include other programs savings under Empower, and they had to be evaluated, that would actually increase the cost of our evaluation. I just wanted to throw that out there too.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Mr. Sheehan?
Yes, Judge McLean. OPC is going to stick with the 3-year term until we get further information that shows that a 4-year term would either, as others have mentioned, save money, or whether there are programs that would benefit any of the goals that really can't be brought into fruition until 4 years. Like the results wouldn't be realized until longer than a 3-year term. So but we're flexible if we do get information such as that.
Okay, thank you, sir. Anybody else? And not that I'm trying to pile onto the utilities for next week, but is that something the utilities could put together in terms of how switching from a 3-year cycle to a 4-year cycle could potentially reduce costs or benefit some of the programs? Is that something that could be put together by next week?
Yeah, speaking from SMECO and hopefully for the others, I think we can produce those kind of numbers. We should have some good historical data on what it's taken to produce these filings in years past, so shouldn't be too difficult.
All right.
Yeah, Jeff, this is Kent at Potomac Edison. I agree with you. I think we should be able to pull something together.
I think, though, I didn't raise my hand, but I think we have to look at other parties too. OPC hires consultants. They have time. Staff is involved with this. So I think it's more than just the utility cost that's involved in this. So I think we have to look at it bigger than just a utility cost, even though that's what goes into the surcharge. It's cost to the state as well.
That's fair. And I think Scott kind of touched on that. Mr. Gravatt.
I was just going to say, when we're looking at these costs, if we're talking about the shift from 3 years to 4 years, then it's not the total cost of the plan, right? It's because you're still going to make a new plan. I don't know how to explain this. Sorry, but the savings, you're deferring the expenditure by a year, so there's savings associated with that. But it's not like we're saving the total cost of doing a plan. Am I right?
Well, if you were in a multiple program year cycle, I think the idea is that if you have multiple cycles and you have fewer planning periods, then proportionally over the lifetime of the programs, you're saving whatever, whether it's, you know, the 30%, 40%, however, or 10%, but relative. So.
Yeah, understood. Okay, thank you.
All right. In follow-up to Mr. Gravatt's comment, is that something that, in terms of savings to the state agencies, is that something that everyone could look at and have figures for next week?
OPC could ballpark that.
Okay.
Judge McLean, this is Kits on MEA. I'm sure we can look into that, but yeah, we should be able to come up with something by next week.
Yeah, and I think Laurie's point is a fair point. If we're going to just look at, I think it's probably more appropriate to look at all the costs if we're seriously going to consider going to a 4-year program or four-year cycle. Yes, sir.
Thing, Judge McLean. I mean, in terms of the number of hearings and the number of, I mean, the cycle plan, as far as my understanding, would be the only thing that would be reduced. So, for example, over a 12-year period, you would have 3 plans instead of 4. In terms of number of hearings, number of filings, I mean, we're still going to, based on our proposal, it's still semi-annual and annuals are, you know, annual filings or semi-annual filings. So from that perspective, I don't see much of a change in that from that perspective. So I think the bulk of the change potentially would be looking at a 12-year period, reducing the cycle plans from 4 to 3. So, but yeah, we will take a look on our end as well. Just thank you.
Appreciate that.
This is Dan Hurley's staff. I'll take a look, but you know, we're going to review these plans no matter when they are. So it's going to cost. It's going to be in our resources, and you know, our staff on power has shrunk over the years, so we're using fewer people to do the same job. So I don't know if we're saving money.
You're already doing more with less.
That's right. We're just
we'll just use your model.
So well, I can ballpark some numbers.
Appreciate that. Yeah, if the state agencies could do that, that'd be great. All right. Anything else on this topic? Kind of got off topic there a little bit. Let's see. I think, let's see, utilities, we're also going to look at first year versus annual reporting on savings.
Yes, thanks, Your Honor. Ed Miller, Potomac Edison. I'm speaking on behalf of the utilities regarding the reporting of first year or annual savings versus life cycle savings. And a few points to make is that, you know, the utilities currently do report, and we propose continuing to report both the first year annual savings and the life cycle savings, both as part of our portfolio plans that we file with the commission, but also as part of our semi-annual reports. So that is something that we have been doing and we propose to continue to do. In terms of goals, however, we do continue to believe that the goals should be based on first year annual savings for several reasons. You know, as we talked about in the last working group meeting, we believe the current processes has worked extremely well for several reasons. The Empower processes have been well developed, including the semi-annual reporting and the evaluation processes that are all very transparent to all stakeholders. You know, again, just highlighting that both first year annual savings and life cycle savings are, you know, provided, you know, both as part of the plans and as part of the semi-annual reports. But probably as important, you know, again, highlighting some comments that I know Sheldon with BG&E made at the last meeting, is that the first year annual savings are a more reliable metric than life cycle savings and can be readily compared to annual targets. So really a great you know, gauge post to monitor the performance of the programs in achieving you know, targets on a annual basis. Whereas there's a much more uncertainty with projecting future life cycle savings because there's many factors that are beyond the utility's control. that can and do change, including baseline conditions, the market and technology changes, all of which evolve over time. And a very recent example to this that many parties are familiar with is the change to the effective useful life for residential lighting, which is currently through the evaluation group. And that effective useful life for residential lighting is being reduced by a factor of 3, which proportionally reduces the life cycle savings for residential lighting. So that really highlights a lot of the uncertainty that there are, both with projecting life cycle savings, but also over time, the life cycle savings that will result from the programs, whereas first year annual savings are known and much more reliable. Additionally, in terms of including an additional metric to goal setting of both life cycle savings in addition to first year annual savings, our comments are that that's really duplicative, complicating, and unnecessary. First off, the programs that we implement provide both first year annual savings and life cycle savings. Again, our plan filings and our semi-annual reports provide both of these metrics. All parties have transparency to our plans and to the progress with implementation of the programs, providing opportunity for all parties to review and comment on any perceived deficiency, either with the investment in or the implementation of measures with longer measure lives. Said another way, when we file our plans, if there's any concerns regarding the amount of life cycle savings or the investment in programs or measures with longer measure lives, there is ample opportunity for parties to comment and to raise that as an issue. And similarly, with our semi-annual reporting, all parties are provided that same information. So progress in terms of our plans can also be measured and reviewed and commented on by any party if anyone believes there's any deficiencies with the performance of our programs in generating life cycle savings. Secondly, the measure life of the technologies and measures in our plan is, critical to both, determining the life cycle savings, but that also flows through our cost effectiveness analysis, which is completed on an annual basis through the evaluation process. So programs, are continually reviewed for cost effectiveness consistent with the current practice. That's completed both as part of our portfolio plan filings, but also throughout implementation of the programs. And then the last thing to mention is, and this kind of touches on some comments that have been made earlier regarding making changes to plans, is, incorporating a life cycle savings metric, just given that life cycle savings is less reliable than first year and annual savings, is likely to increase administration requirements on all parties, because what could happen is throughout implementation of the programs, any changes that impacts life cycle savings, such as the change to the effective useful life for residential lighting, that magnitude of a reduction could easily require a plan change or program changes in order to attempt to meet a goal that was set prior to the change, or to pursue any goal adjustments to incorporate the changes as they occur. And that kind of touches on some of the administrative efficiencies that we've been talking about, both with increasing the plans, plan cycles from 3 years to 4 years. Having to file for goal, for any goal changes or plan or program changes with the commission just causes cost increases, for all the parties.
Thank you, sir. Dr. McNeil.
Good morning, Mr. Kitson McNeil, Maryland Energy Administration. Thank you, Mr. Miller, for that presentation or discussion points there. So I have a couple questions. In terms of the changes to the effective useful life of any measure, I guess in this example or the most recent example with lighting, doesn't that also change the baseline for first year energy savings? So, I mean, I guess, isn't that consistent whether you're using first year or life cycle energy saving? Or am I completely wrong on this?
A measure life change does not impact first year savings. It just impacts the term over which that the measure will generate savings, or the life cycle component.
Okay, so I was under the impression, I guess I will have to dig into this some more, that the baseline was changing, which effectively reduces how much energy savings you can get in the first year anyway.
Yeah, if we're talking about a baseline change, that will reduce both your first year annual savings as well as your life cycle savings. But a measure life change would change the life cycle savings, not the first year savings.
Thank you for that
Right.
clarification.
So, sorry to interrupt. This is Dan Hurley. So, I guess like an hour of use change would affect first year and life cycle change energy savings if you change the hours of use in a lighting program.
Correct. And the other piece of that, though, is when you look at some of the measures in our plans that could be 12, 15 years in length, and hours of use change for, say, commercial lighting with building types, which could occur. And hours of use change, because if you're looking at a first year annual savings, and hours of use change will not impact that number as much as it impacts life cycle because it's compounded by the measure life. So it becomes, it basically, I'm not sure what the right word is, but it compounds it because of the life of the measure. So there are a lot of, I'll say, a technology market baseline type changes that could occur. And the measure life will compound it just because of the duration of the duration of which it's being recognized.
Oh, thank you for that. So I guess quick follow-up to that. I'm not familiar with, I mean, the lighting change is the most recent one that I'm familiar with or I've experienced since working with Empower. In terms of longer life measures that have changed in the recent years, is that something that's frequent? I mean, do you have any example of something like a HVAC or something else that has a longer life measure that has changed in recent years? I mean, I know lighting was 12 years before, and now it's 3, so that was a longer life. But is there anything else that, I mean, off the top of your head that you could provide as an example?
Off top of my head, I don't have anything top of mind unless one of my counterparts does. I do recognize that TRM.
Didn't mean to put you on the mic. I was just curious.
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
no, go ahead.
Yeah, the follow up is, what I tend to see is what TRM changes is as we start to see either efficiency conditions change, there's often measure life changes that accompanies that. So potentially that could occur, for any measure that's within the portfolio, is as heat pumps become more efficient and there's higher tiers and higher efficiency ratings, those corresponding measure lives are also associated with different technology effectively. So there's always the risk of those measure life changes as technology evolves.
Okay. All right. So quickly, I just have 2 other quick questions here. So based on my understanding of the description provided by Mr. Loper in the past meeting, that essentially the life cycle, and I'm paraphrasing here, I don't mean to misquote Mr. Loper, but the life cycle savings are already being used in the cost benefit analysis. So wouldn't a switch to life cycle savings essentially align the savings that are achieved with the life cycle, with the cost effectiveness evaluation that is being done?
I see doing cost effectiveness analysis is different. I see it's to me, it's 2 different things. It's one thing to assess compliance with a goal, and which is, our position is advocating for a first year annual savings because it is reliable. But cost effectiveness analysis is supporting, recognizing that there are benefits, across many measures and programs that accrue for many years, and that's recognized as a benefit in the cost benefit analysis. I don't see that as a disconnect in any way. I think recognizing measure life and cost effectiveness analysis is entirely consistent in the industry, as an example. And part of that analysis, again, it recognizes, whatever portion of the portfolios that might be shorter measure lives versus longer measure lives. And actually it's almost a call it a boundary, so to speak, is we have to have longer measure lives in the plan for the portfolios to be cost effective. So in itself, the cost effectiveness analysis is a check given, the need to have cost effective portfolios.
Okay, thank you for that. And finally, in terms of the use of the energy savings and the plan submitted for Empower, and just generally by the utilities, are those plans or the energy savings used in any of your other planning? Is it helpful to have in terms of planning for future distribution work or anything like that, or is something like that not used widely in I guess for the utilities?
I can only speak for Potomac Edison in that regard, but I know we do provide our energy efficiency anticipated savings to our load forecasting group, and they factor that into our load forecasting. I can't cite the horizon upon which that is, but I do know that does factor into the utilities planning, at least for Potomac Edison.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. Got a couple hands up, Mr. Gravett, then Brian Howard.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just a couple of quick comments. One is, the utilities a few times have said that because the plans are reviewed by the commission and parties have the opportunity to comment if they think the overall lifetime is insufficient, that's enough. But, in my experience, and I suspect it's true for the utilities as well, certainly in litigated proceedings, regulators will look to the law or the regulation to determine their actions. And so if there's a standard, as there has been, that's set in annual savings, and we come in and say the average lifetime isn't long enough, the commission will look at that and say, yeah, but they're in compliance with the annual savings targets, so therefore everything's good. So I think having goals that are consistent with what we think needs to be achieved, makes sense. I don't think it's sufficient to say that parties can come in and make comments and expect that the commission will act on that basis. And the other thing I just want to ask about, I've heard a number of times this idea that lifetime savings are inherently riskier, inherently less reliable. I'm not aware of any empirical data that support that position. It's not an argument I've heard in other places before. So if the utilities have some empirical data to support that, or if Mr. Loper can talk about if he agrees that lifetime savings are inherently less reliable and perhaps the extent to which he thinks they're less reliable, that would be helpful for me to understand.
I mean, just quickly, Mr. Rat, I would say that the fact that we discount them kind of provides at least some empirical, indication that there is risk that those future savings won't occur. And that's, part of the notion of the, discount factors in terms of investment and time value of money is that, the guarantee of today is worth more than the potential of non-guarantee for tomorrow. So, without getting into other details and other things, the fact that it is discounted, that future savings are discounted, does speak to a certain inherent risk of occurrence versus not.
Yeah, and to follow what Megan is saying too is I think it's easy for everyone to see and agree that when we're developing a plan for next year or the year after, we're using assumptions that we know based on what we know today. And certainly if you're looking out a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, those assumptions are, there is some potential that some of the underlying assumptions change in the short term. Now you go out 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, there's much more risk that those underlying assumptions change. It doesn't matter what you're projecting, you're projecting. So first year annual savings are near term, and there's relatively more certainty with those assumptions. The further out you go with any of the assumptions, I don't care what it is, there's some level of uncertainty and speculation that goes into it, and it's compounded by the risk of technological changes and market changes, such as the evolution of lighting that is causing a significant change in the effective useful life that will occur, and other technologies will see that occur, and the further you go out, the higher the risk.
I remain unconvinced, but thank you for your answer.
All right. Mr. Howard.
Hi, this is Brian Howard with ACEEE. I had a question, and maybe this is for utilities or for staff. I'm not sure who can answer it, but there was a comment made that that because of there are balanced portfolio looking at future or longer term measures. The portfolio looks like, I know we're trying to balance in the current context of things, but without kind of knowing how that relates, it's hard to feel informed about how that does impact things, I guess. So maybe I'm not answering that or asking that question well, but I'd just be interested to know, in the current context of things, how long, what are the current life measures that we're looking at on an annual basis for various different types of equipment, or what the portfolio looks like in general, even if we're using the first cost analysis lens.
This is Dan Harley with stats. So I think overall the average portfolio measure life is around, and someone can correct me, but it's around 6 to 7 years, based on the various measures that are offered in the programs. I don't know if that answers your question or not, Brian.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
I guess I would just. Oh, it does. Dan, thank you. And I guess I would just say that based on. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Ed.
I was just going to say, to follow up what Dan's saying, I believe when I checked Potomac Edison's plan last time, it was in excess of 7 years. And there are, when you look at your appliance measures, your HVAC measures, even your comprehensive weatherization measures in the plan, many of those are 12 through 18 years in duration. So there are some significant measure lives that are, within the portfolios.
Thank you, sir. Dan, you also had did you have your hand up?
Yes, I just wanted to let everyone know that Joe Loper is not on the call today, but I can forward any questions to him, and we can respond to the group via email if that works for everyone. I want to just point out, we've been talking a lot about the changes of the lighting program, and I think part of that has to do with the fact that under the Obama administration, it looked like the lighting standards were going to change, January 1st of 2020. But then those were rolled back. So if those standards had gone into effect when we thought they were, we might not even have a lighting program in this program cycle, let alone not having it for the next program cycle. So there's some, usually the EPA will raise the standards on their equipment, and under Empower, we incentivize measures and equipment that go beyond the standard baseline. So we had an extra few years of a lighting baseline that allowed us to keep lighting in our programs, and it was still cost effective, but there was a good chance that the lighting program was going to be diminished in this program cycle if those standards had gone into effect as we thought they were a couple of years ago. So I think lighting might be a little unique program to talk about the life cycle with those unique changes.
All right, thanks, Dan. Any other questions or comments?
I guess just one more
comment
for me. This is Dan Hurley again. it seems like the group is on agreement that we're going to have some kind of carbon reduction goal. It seems, we don't know what it's going to be, but it seems that we're kind of on that same, we're on the same wavelength as far as that. And I was just curious as how we thought we were going to be calculating that savings. Are we taking the megawatt hour savings, the megawatt savings, the therm savings, and applying a calculator to get a, carbon reduction number? Because if that's how we're going to do it, then I'm not sure, we're going to have to reach certain goals underneath. We're going to have to reach certain megawatt savings, and therm savings to reach the carbon reduction goal. So it seems like they're all going to be kind of interactively and interplayed amongst each other as far as achieving the overall arching goal of the carbon reduction goal. So I just wanted to see if anyone had thoughts or opinions about how we would go about calculating carbon reduction. Thanks.
Anyone want to jump on that? Mr. Gravatt? You want to do up another proposal for next week?
No, thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Mr. Hurley, I think I agree with you that it's mostly, well, you weren't saying this is what you think, but I do think it's most likely, using multipliers, emissions multipliers. I think part of the reason to have not just a megawatt hour savings goal, but a greenhouse gas reduction goal is under that framework, it recognizes the importance of the carbon savings that will come from beneficial electrification. And it doesn't put, I think it's been a question in some jurisdictions. It's like, wait a second, we've been supposed to save energy and now you're telling us, or for an electric utility, we're supposed to save electricity, and now you're telling us to increase electric load by fuel switching people off of other fuels. So under a greenhouse gas reduction framework, it recognizes the value of both towards the climate goals. I do want to say, and it maybe I'm just going to mention this as a consideration. I did note what Mr. Hoagland said about the movement in emissions related to the grid over time, and that could pose a complication for a goal framed as carbon dioxide equivalent abatement. So it may be that we could or should also reconsider. I think some jurisdictions have an MMBTU target instead of which is fuel neutral, and would allow for carbon reductions, but might be easier to figure out than the carbon reduction. Something to think about.
Dr. McNeil, I'll get right to you. Hey, Dan, follow-up question for you. In terms of how we may go about calculating the carbon reduction goal, is that something that we should touch on now, or is that something that would be better in the expanding Empower energy equity section, or how we're going to measure the goals?
Yeah, I think that's part of the goal discussion. So I think we need to, if we come to agreement on this carbon reduction goal is appropriate, then we definitely need to come up with how we're going to figure out how we're going to calculate it. So that has to be part of the discussion.
All right. So you're saying, so if I understood you, you're saying that we should hammer this out now?
I think so.
Okay. All right.
But, I'm not in charge of the group, and if others are with me or against me, I don't know.
Well, I certainly don't want to get to the end and everybody said, well, we should have done this a long time ago. All right.
If it's as simple as taking a multiplier for emissions based off of kWh, kW, and therms, then I don't think that's overly complicated.
All right. I'm going to just take the over as it going to be as being that simple. I'm guessing that's probably something that if the parties haven't thought about already, that they probably would want to think about it, and it's probably something that we should have some written comments on. Would you agree with that approach, Dan?
Yeah, I think that's good way to go about it.
Okay. All right. Cindy.
Speaking of administrative efficiency, it would make sense to me, and please correct me if I'm missing something here, but it would make sense to me that, if there is some formula that's developed that makes sense that we can agree upon, that it would be housed under PSC. Not sure, and that there would be adequate staff to kind of monitor that work.
Okay, that's a good thought. Mr. Gravatt.
Thank you, Your Honor. I was going to say that I would assume that this would also fall under the purview of the independent evaluator, Mr. Loper, and his team to verify the savings are done correctly. But I would also look to the work that E3 and other work that the MDE is commissioned in assessing the carbon reductions, carbon abatement that would ensue from some of these activities. I think it would make an awful lot of sense for us to be consistent with the approach that they used in their modeling, if it's applicable.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else?
Just a reminder, the GGRA under Maryland law has requirements for economic benefits and job creation. I think that sometimes gets lost along the way, but just wanted to point it out in case anyone wasn't familiar with that.
Thank you, ma'am. All right. All right. I know I said that we'd meet next week, but given that I'm guessing, is it fair to say that folks are going to need more than just a few days to put something together on a carbon reduction goal and how that should be calculated?
Judge McLean, just as maybe a question on the scope of that. I mean, I think from a PEPCO DPL perspective, that we're all about sort of the simple methodology that Dan was just talking about.
Okay.
And so I'm happy to work, obviously, and write comments and work with the joint utilities to put down comments. I'm just not sure if there's a controversy here that we need to go after, looking for a way maybe to make your life a little bit simpler.
Well, as well as making your life simpler. I mean, is Dan correct? I mean, does everybody love his proposal? I mean, if it is, then let's just check that off the box and move on.
I mean, I'd say I don't have a different proposal, and in calculating greenhouse gas abatement is not my particular area of expertise. But I'm sure Mr. Loper has opinions about it, and that might be useful to. I wonder if Mr. Loper could perhaps propose a methodology that we could then discuss or react to.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Hold on, Phil. Dr. McNeil.
Kitzel McNeil, MEA. Just a quick follow-up on that. So in our proposal, I guess generally, one of the things we pointed out in the presentation I did sorry about that. Electricity is still the second leading source of greenhouse gas emission in the state. So any reduction in usage due to energy efficiency would facilitate a reduction in greenhouse gas and help us to achieve the goal. So I guess based on if there's more detail, we can look at that. Based on what Mr. Hurley just said, it seems to kind of align with what we proposed in terms of just general reduction in energy. So, but if there's more detail, we would gladly look at that and I'd provide more comments. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. Mr. Sheehan.
Yes, OPC, we'll look at this before the next meeting, but the formulaic simplicity of what Mr. Hurley described is very appealing to us.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm pleasantly surprised. And that's
well, if everyone wants to agree with me, I have some other ideas.
About Empower, just generally. Mr. Howard.
Both.
I was just going to ask, is it possible, sorry, Brian Howard from ACEEE, is it possible to for staff to share the calculation or the proposed calculation, just so we have that in writing, in case, again, we do have people who are really interested in providing counter offers or proposals?
Sure. So I don't have the proposed calculation. I was just asking if there is a kind of a general methodology out there that kind of is already used that we don't have to.
Oh, sorry about that. Dan. I misheard what you were saying.
Oh, as did I. I thought we
I
had a
didn't
solution
have
already.
I'm sure there's some calculators out there that we could look at.
Is that something that Joe Loper might have, Dan?
That's a good question.
Or is he the best person to ask? Or
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that's quite in his scope within his contract as the independent evaluator, but you know, I guess at some point there is some kind of evaluation with this. But I'll take it up with Joe offline, but I'm sure he'd be happy to come up with something if I ask him.
Okay, yeah. If you could, if you or if Joe could circulate something in advance of next week's meeting, that'd be great. So, Scott.
I'm just thinking MDE probably does something like greenhouse gas emissions. Why wouldn't it make sense to use whatever formula they use to match that?
Scott, you got another question? Just jump on in. Or did you just lower your hand?
No, sorry. I went to lower it.
Yeah.
I guess maybe you lowered it.
Sure. Anybody from MDE, do you guys have such a calculation?
I'm not sure it fits exactly within Empower. I'm not sure I'm following here. So we have a cost-effective cost-benefit analysis. Are you proposing to replace that with a new proposal, or like on top of? Like, I'm not sure I understand where.
No, I don't. I think it's just a carbon reduction goal, and how that should be calculated was my understanding.
Okay, to replace the cost-effective test, or like in addition to?
No. We're not even talking about cost effectiveness.
Or cost benefit.
I don't think we're just talking about as a separate goal, a carbon reduction goal.
Okay.
And whether or not MDE has a calculation like that.
I don't have anything off the top of my head. We would have to see, but I think it would make sense for PSC, given, you know, the expertise there, to propose a methodology formally, and we can discuss further.
Okay. All right, thanks. Mr. Gravatt, you chimed on, and then we'll go to Pearl.
I'm not sure Pearl and I might say the same thing, but I mean, I'm certain that in the analysis that MDE has done, and I think E3 did some of that they did calculations about if 1,000 heat pumps are installed to replace 1,000 propane furnaces, what's the carbon reduction? So I'm sure there's some analysis and calculations in there. I also support the easy multiplier approach, but to the extent that it can produce answers that are not wildly different from what MDE came up with, that would probably be good.
Thank you, sir. Ma'am?
I have nothing to add to what Jim said, really. I think there are multipliers. I think we just agree on those multipliers, and there's something built into MDE's modeling. So if there's a way for us to stay consistent with that, I think that it probably makes sense.
All right. All right. I would agree that makes sense as well. All right. So we'll follow up with MDE to see if they have anything on this. Anyone else on this? All right. By my account, the only thing we have left to talk about is the utilities. We're going to talk about whether the cost effectiveness should be based on sub-portfolio level or program level.
Hi, that would be me, at least to start. The utilities really feel that it needs to stay. I'm going to use the term sector to mean a residential portfolio and then a C&I portfolio like we do today. And that's because we develop programs to create opportunities for all of our customers to participate and benefit from Empower Maryland. And some programs are highly cost effective. Some programs may be a little less cost effective, or maybe they're providing energy savings, but they're not cost effective. And we just want to make sure that with the portfolio and the customers paying into the surcharge at the C&I or residential level, that there's something there for everybody. And if we can't offer all the programs that we offer and roll up to a cost-effective portfolio, we may not be able to reach all of our customers. And then the other thing is, as time goes on, again, looking at flexibility over a program cycle, whether it's 3 years or longer, is things change, whether it's the lighting cliff we're all waiting for, or whether it's what I'll refer to as diminishing returns, that someone 10 or 12 years ago replaced equipment with efficient equipment, and now they're replacing it with even more efficient equipment. There's diminishing returns on, the bump between the replacement of equipment. So it becomes more difficult to be cost effective for every program. A program that might be cost effective at the end of a program cycle or the beginning of a new program cycle may lose effectiveness over time. So with that, we think that we need to have it at some sort of portfolio level so we could reach everyone. And I'm done. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add.
And that has been the utilities position. That's how it's been looked at currently.
Yes.
And that's okay. So you guys stay
We're looking at status quo.
Okay.
I guess if we, I wouldn't argue for a total portfolio, because I think we do look at it residential, commercial. But if there was a change to be made, I would bump it up rather than bump it down, because I think you can lose what you can offer to customers.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. I'm sorry. Anyone want to follow up or have any questions for the utility on this issue? Mr. McGee.
Hello, Judge. How are you?
I'm well, sir. How are you doing?
Good. I'm Jim McGee. I'm representing the HVAC associations, and we agree with the utilities. I've been paying attention the last couple meetings and haven't spoken up yet, but we agree with the utilities on what Ms. Duhan just said for the residential or sub-portfolio level. And just broader, I know it's not the topic now, but I just wanted to give our support to the Building Performance Association, the comments that they made. We support them. So just if you can note that for your records, please. Thank
Noted.
you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Dylan.
Thank you. Again, Dylan Voorhees with the EIC. Lori, thanks for that comment and clarification. It's my understanding that OPC also thinks that measuring cost effectiveness at that you call sector level is, as we're currently doing it, it does make sense. I guess a question would be for if activities that are happening on the utility side of the meter are included, how or where, if anywhere, does sort of cost effectiveness for those activities or savings get pulled in, because those are not as easy to assign to a specific sector. Some may, but some.
Someone may be wiser than me in this. I'll kick it off, and then hopefully somebody else can maybe complete the thoughts that I'm starting with. And again, as I said when we started, there's sort of two kinds of utility side of the meter, and I'll use what I would consider, an example of a vehicle to grid. If we use that for demand response, and we say if we let us do this, you're going to get an incentive of X amount per event or X amount per year. That's clearly residential. Or if we ever had a business demand response and it was hooked up somewhere else, maybe we would do something with the fleet. But looking at the current programmatic, I think there's some things that are currently have Empower that we would recommend having Empower incentives, and those Empower incentives would go to the residential or C&I as appropriate. So I would see that as no different. It is my understanding, but this is where someone else may need to jump in, that we do not include the utility programs that are not the utility side of the meter programs that don't have an incentive associated with it, that they are savings without costs and they're not included in cost effectiveness. So, and again, someone else who works closer with this can elaborate on that. That's, I've got a higher level of understanding there.
Yeah, this is the portal with Pepco and DBL. That's definitely accurate, Lori. So just confirm, please. That's my understanding. Otherwise, there would be a lopsided, be an inaccurate calculation. So hope that helps.
So I guess the way to simplify the conversation might be, if something is included in the surcharge, if the costs are included for recovery in the surcharge, we would look at the cost effectiveness. I think that might be the simplest way to say that.
I would say, Lori, it's correct. And just to add on that, the corollary to that, Lori, is, is that as we're looking at the cost effectiveness of things that are funded by Empower versus not, the things that are not funded through Empower are going through a pretty rigorous cost effectiveness screening in their own rights, whether through a rate case or whatever separate proceeding through which the utilities are getting authorization. So it would be almost like having a double dose of that scrutiny.
Thanks, Megan. Does that help, Dylan?
Yeah, that. Thank you.
You don't seem to
help.
Enthusiastically helpful.
Pardon me. I think I hear what Megan is saying. I guess what I also sort of heard was we're counting the benefits in Empower. We're just not doing we're just not counting the cost side, so we're not therefore doing a cost effectiveness.
Right. So the saving, sorry, Dylan, this is Dan Hurley. So the savings from the other programs count towards goal, but they are not included as a benefit in the cost benefit calculations.
Which in some ways, because you've already demonstrated, for those that are trying to make it more difficult, things that get approved are already going to be cost effective. So if we were to include it, it actually would help offset any less cost effective, more challenging things. But I don't think we want to go down that path. But regardless, those things have already been screened separately, to Dan's point.
Thanks, Megan.
Thank you.
You got two hands up, Dr. McNeil, and then Mr. Gravatt.
Kitson McNeil, Maryland Energy Administration. Just a quick follow-up on this last line of conversation here. So, for example, I know we're not we're not supposed to say CVR because it's a bad word, or a bad acronym. But so for example, CVR is included in the rate base for the different utilities, the utilities that have it, and there is I guess please clarify if I'm let me know if I'm wrong. There is a cost effectiveness evaluation that is done prior to implementation of CVR. Is there something that's done after the implementation of CVR, or both, or I guess first, the latter, the former versus the latter? So is it before, after, or both? If someone could clarify that for me, I would appreciate it, please. I will move on.
Is this a Joe Loper question?
No, because it's not included in Empower. I'm assuming it's not a Joe Loper question. It's a utility question. So okay.
I think we need to go back to our regulatory folks, just because it's not run by Empower. And I'm not trying to say trying to punt, but because it isn't run by Empower, I don't think that the people that are on the phone are comfortable unequivocally stating what that process is. So.
Well, this is Doug Keel, and I'm a regulatory lawyer. So I'll take a crack at this, Dr. McNeil. In a rate case, we don't have to show that everything is cost beneficial, right? I mean, we're running our system. We have various feeders, and we have COMAR regulations on what a level of power we have to have on those feeders. And as long as we're within those levels, we're meeting COMAR, we're serving our customers, we're providing safe and adequate service. So I don't understand what kind of cost benefit analysis you think would be necessary or needed in the context of a base rate case. So I don't understand the premise of your question.
Okay, thank you. Let me try to clarify. So I guess maybe I misinterpreted what was being said by the utilities just now, that the programs that are not included, that are not funded by the Empower surcharge, were being evaluated in some way to show that they are either the savings are being verified or it's being cost effective either prior to implementation or at some point. I guess, did I misinterpret that from the
certainly the use of CVR, conservation voltage reduction, could be subject to challenge in any base rate case that we have. To date, I'm unaware that anyone has challenged inclusion of those, and I don't know, because I'm not a technical person, what the costs are to put conservation voltage reduction in place. But I do know this: it's a component of our AMI system that allows us to do that, and that's already been found cost effective by the commission in a base rate case. So it's part and parcel of our AMI system that's been approved and has been found to be cost effective.
Okay, all right, thank you. That is sufficient for, I guess, the question that I asked. So thank you for that. So a couple quick things here from MEA. So Judge McLean, I think MEA was also supposed to, I guess I asked to provide feedback on whether or not cost effectiveness should be at the sector, portfolio, or program level from MEA's perspective. I guess at this point, we are going to support the continued, I guess, sector level evaluation or cost effectiveness. But I just would like to raise for the groups for discussion, or not, I guess, that I took a look at the most recent evaluation done by the state's independent evaluator. And I just looked at residential briefly this morning, so I didn't get to look at CV at the commercial industrial. However, so the verified savings for the residential side was about 740, 750, somewhere around there, million megawatt hours. And so 90% of that came from the programs that were cost effective. Now, again, I understand the utilities position and other stakeholders' position, and generally MEA supports the position that, you know, we should try to get programs that support participation from a broader group of rate base or customers. However, I just wanted to point out that approximately, again, based on my rough calculation here, 90% of the savings came from cost-effective programs. And I'm looking at cost effectiveness at using the TRC and the societal cost test. So, you know, at this point, I guess the question is, and I guess it may have already been answered, is that those other programs that provide the 10%, you know, in terms of the cost effectiveness for those programs, are ratepayers really, is there a substantial benefit to continue supporting those programs? And again, we support continuing what's being done, but I would just like to raise for the group's attention that maybe there's an opportunity here to restructure, look at, further examine what is being done and what has been done. I only looked at 1 year, which was the most recent report for residential. So I didn't look at it from, you know, over the program life. But yeah, I think it's startling, or it's impressive, I guess, whichever way you want to put it, that 90% approximately came from cost-effective programs. So the cost-effective programs are doing most of the work. And then you have programs that, you know, have substantially lower than one for the TRC and the societal cost test. So I guess we'll just stop there. But just to reiterate, we support continuing what's been done. However, we just wanted to raise that for the group's attention. So,
thank you, Dr. McNeil. Before I get to Mr. Gravatt,
Judge McLean, you're on.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just noticed, before I get to Mr. Gravatt, does anyone want to respond to Dr. McNeil's comments? I think 90% is pretty good, at least from how most people grade.
I have a quick response, but I don't know if Brian was putting his hand up.
Yeah, I just was going to ask, to me, some of this also gets into some of the cost effectiveness discussions that we're going to have, and whether some of the things we're doing from an evaluation side need to be adjusted either to better reflect overall or larger cost effectiveness implications. That's all I was just going to say.
Okay. Good point, Brian. Dylan?
Thank you, Your Honor. And I was going to say, I think those observations, Kitson, are really important, and they're of course not unique to Maryland. And I think different jurisdictions have tackled this in different ways, and in some cases have been extremely explicit about identifying these are programs where we're trying to drive cost-effective savings. We're trying to acquire a resource, the most savings for the least cost, and that's what these programs are for. And we have other programs and other goals, and this is to the anticipating not just the conversation about cost effectiveness, but conversation about equity goals, and including but not limited to low income, where we have other goals which are not the same as achieving the most savings for the lowest price possible. And some jurisdictions have been very explicit about separating those and saying these are the programs where we're going to drive a total resource cost test or whatever cost test, and we're going to make everybody be above 1, and we're going to maximize the savings. And these are other programs that we're going to use to achieve other goals, ideally goals that are quantified, but not quantified in the same way that a cost effectiveness test. And of course, some places have just exempted low income programs from cost effectiveness tests as a sort of very simple way of doing that. I think there are other ways of trying to be more explicit in naming the other goals, like participation, breadth of participation, and not then trying to pretend that they are designed to achieve a TRC of 1. So I'll leave it there.
Appreciate the comments, Mr. Voorhees. And yeah, I mean, again, if there are other goals that are being supported by these programs, that I think that's great. From, again, the programs that I looked at were utility programs, so we didn't include the limited income programs provided by DHCD. So again, it was just an observation. I took a little time just to take a look at that to see what exactly has been done or what is going on. So I just found it interesting. I just wanted to share. So that's it.
Thank you, Dr. McNeil and Dylan. Mr. Gravatt, and then Cindy.
Wait, there, now it's down. Okay. I just wanted to respond to Ms. Doohan, and generally, I agree that either cost effectiveness testing should be done at the sub-portfolio or the portfolio level. I'm not sure why. I want to look back at the 2015 order where the commission said sub-portfolio, because I can't remember what the commission, or may have even been our comments, what we thought was better about doing sub-portfolio than total portfolio, because I think for the reasons that Ms. Doohan mentioned, which is primarily making sure that all customers have an opportunity to access the benefits of energy efficiency, I'm not sure what advantage there is to doing it at the sub-portfolio level. I also just very briefly want to say the other reason to look at a broader lens than just program level is not just to make sure customers have opportunity, but also to make room for programs that may not be cost effective in year 1 or year 2, but that with increased volume and time will become cost effective. There can be, Duke in Indiana has said on heat pump water heaters, well, it's not cost effective, but it will get more cost effective when volumes increase. But if the cost effectiveness framework prevents them from doing the work that will make it more cost effective, then there's an opportunity squandered. So I think, having those kinds of opportunities included in a portfolio or sub-portfolio look makes a ton of sense. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Cindy.
I wanted to play the climate scientist role for a second. Just a reminder that the Northeast is expected to experience higher levels of precipitation events, more variability. Maryland in particular has Baltimore and Annapolis and Ellicott City that are in danger of flooding events, either due to big precipitation events, big rain events, or just everyday sunny day flooding. So that doesn't fit within the cost benefit / cost effectiveness test. But long term, in terms of markets, market unknowns, that is also part of the picture here.
All right, thank you, ma'am. All right. Anyone else? Once, twice. All right. Well, I will, based on the conversations today, we'll still plan on meeting next Thursday. I'll get out a modified timeline for everyone. And I'll also reach out to MDE to see when we can fit in their briefing on the Climate Commission's expectations in terms of for Empower, and I'll also reach out to them on Dan's issue of the calculation of the carbon reduction goal. And I think that's about it. And if the utilities could just circulate, or if anyone wants to comment on Mr. Gravat's filing from today, if you could circulate those comments no later than Wednesday at noon, that's June 9th, so we can all have a discussion about them. And then hopefully we can wrap up the discussion on goal structure and move on. Anybody have anything before we sign off? Ms. Duhan?
I believe, I want to clarify if you wanted it by Wednesday or not, that there was a request to get costs for a proceeding. So if we had one every 4th year, then over 12 years, you save X amount of dollars or whatever. Is that something that you wanted by Wednesday in writing, or just be ready to talk about, or for another day?
I mean, if it's something that you could put together for Wednesday, I think that'd be preferable, so everyone would have an idea going in. And I appreciate that reminder, because that was somewhere buried in my goals, or my notes, but couldn't read my own chicken scratch. But yes, if whoever wants to respond on terms of efficiencies and savings moving from a 3-year cycle to a 4-year cycle, if those could also be included by Wednesday at noon, and I'll follow up with everyone with an email, so things will be hopefully a little bit clearer. But I do appreciate that reminder. Anyone else? Once, twice. All right. Oh, yes, Dr. McNeil.
Just a quick follow-up, Jack. So the final response is that you're going to push that a week. Is that?
Yes.
Okay. Just wanted
Yeah, because my thought would be that there's probably a strong likelihood that parties are going to want to include whatever we talk about next week in their final written comments, and I don't want to short anyone's time. Mr. Sheehan.
Oh, I have no comment.
Oh, okay. All right. Very good. All right. Did that help, Dr. McNeil?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. Anyone else? All right. All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see everyone next Thursday.
Thank you, Your Honors.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.